This is You're Probably Right. Entertainment first, everything else is just bonus. Opinions, all ours. Sometimes backed by research, but never the final word. There are always exceptions, so take it with a grain of salt and a slight dusting of chili powder. If something in this episode resonates with you or you want to reach out directly, you can email the show at yprpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find the podcast on Facebook. Just search You're Probably Right podcast and the page should come up. And if you are listening somewhere other than Spotify, you can find the show there as well. Just search You're Probably Right and follow the podcast so new episodes show up automatically. All right, let's get into it.
Hey, y'all, what's up? This is MCM, and you're listening to You're Probably Right. Thank you for coming back again. Remember, these episodes are for entertainment purposes only, if you're wondering. I heard something funny today, and it might not be related to actually anything, except for this person is obviously angry and bitter. It says, may her battery die while she's with a guy who can't afford to buy a new one. Now, honestly, that's funny, but if you really feel that way, then that's some bitter grapes to swallow. And it ain't wine. So check it out, guys. Here's the weird thing here. I'm about to do something you're never supposed to do, and that is drink coffee and eat a cookie while podcasting. Says who you say? I don't know. I guess it just doesn't sound good in the microphone, but this is a special episode. So I'm going to actually do what you're not supposed to do in a special episode. And obviously I'm not going to be rude about it. So don't worry. I'm not going to be crunching the cookie into the microphone. I'll turn away. Don't worry. First of all, if you want to hang out with me and pretend that it's just me and you, well, it's not really pretend, right? Because I am talking to you and you're listening and maybe you're by yourself. This is like over a cup of tea or over a cup of coffee or a chai or whatever it is whatever you drink. Not funny stuff, hopefully. And I'm gonna basically, I'm not gonna recap everything for the last, how long I'm gonna say in a second, but I've been on this topic sort of for the last, this is this is episode 305. I didn't say. I would say for the last 90, which is weird, and you can put with it what you would. About 90 episodes, pretty much somewhere around this topic. And this one, I think, caps it all. Now, not to say that I won't have anything further to say, but a lot of these episodes have been letters to people who tend to lean towards being anxious in their attachment style. Those who think they need to work for love and it makes sense to them. And I guess their counterparts, right? Dismissive, avoidance, But I've looked at this whole thing from many angles, and I think I probably could legitimately do a teaching on the actual topic at a pretty high level, I believe. I would say even university level. And I think when you're best at explaining something, it's, of course, after you've understood it. But I think even after you understand it, if you have had some experience in that whole dynamic and it's something that you've been paying attention to and it makes sense and you can call back situations in your learning and situations in your life about a topic, I think that you would probably be a good candidate to at least give your opinion one way or the other, or at least your take on what is happening in that dynamic or situation or topical, informational, whatever. So yes, I have a coffee here. So if you want to pause and go grab one and come back. I'm not gonna sit here and wait, guys. Come on. You gotta pause the thing yourself. All right. Um, but I think you're gonna like this episode. Let me just pull it up here. Okay. So the title, because actually usually when I do my episodes, it's one foul swoop kind of a process. Whereas um the topic usually comes to me somehow, some way, or just through something I see, or something that I've done, or something that I've experienced, or something that I've learned, and then it's like I feel motivated to talk about it at length. So I got to go research, look it up, um, and then I create the body of what I want to talk about. Maybe it's just lines, and maybe it's full written out lectures, or not really lectures, but talks um, on whatever it is. Anyhow, I wanted to say something else. I'm not gonna say it, but listen, this one episode is called "Don't Be Embarrassed." The main thing is you finally got here. Now what? Episode 305. And the reason why I wanted to name it something like that, because with me, when I name my episodes, a lot of the time I'm trying to say what I really want to say within, less than 20 letters, or 20 words. Oh, I forgot to tell you guys. Listen.
If this sounds familiar, follow the show so this kind of thinking stays close.
That's it. Okay, listen. Don't be embarrassed. The main thing is you finally got here. Now what? That's the question nobody prepares you for. Not the breakup question, not the conflict question, not the why question, the now what question. The one that shows up after the noise dies down, after the explaining, after the effort, after you realizing you were holding on to something by yourself for a long time and calling it a connection. Because here's the part people don't like to admit out loud, really. Most endings don't end with a bang. They end with a quiet awareness that you were alone in it long before it officially stopped. And that awareness hits differently. It doesn't come with anger. It doesn't come with embarrassment. Not the loud kind, not the private kind. Well, maybe the private kind. The kind where you replay moments and realize you filled in silence with hope. The kind where you recognize effort, or where you recognize it at least, as intimacy. Even when it wasn't being returned. It's not so easy to drink the coffee. I swallowed it and it still sounded weird after. That's funny. And when it finally clicks, your first instinct isn't to blame them. It's to look at yourself and think, how did I stay here this long? That's the part people don't like to talk about in these situations. They want to be all, yeah. Because it threatens the story we tell ourselves about being perceptive, about being grounded, about being emotionally intelligent. Because look what you stuck yourself into, right, for so long. But here's the truth. You can be all of those things and still stay too long. Another bad idea. Especially if you were raised to be reasonable. Especially if you learned early that love meant adapting, not asking. That's enough, the cookie. That didn't work. Especially if you became good and carrying weight quietly. Some people don't hold on because they're weak. They hold on because they're disciplined. They hold on because they were taught not to quit, not to make waves, not to center themselves. They hold on because walking away feels dramatic and staying feels mature. And they really do connect with people from their side. Until one day, staying just feels empty. And when that day comes, there's no applause for leaving. There's no validation ceremony. There's no clean emotional exit ramp. There's just this moment where you realize the thing you were protecting was already gone. And you were still standing there, arms out, hey, acting like it was mutual. It wasn't. That realization stings in every flippin' parcel of your being in a specific way. Not because you lost someone, but because you see yourself clearly in the act of overreaching. That's where the embarrassment lives. Not because you cared. Caring isn't the problem. The problem is when when your caring becomes a substitute for actually being chosen. You're fooling yourself. When effort becomes the stand-in for desire, when availability becomes the reason someone keeps you close without ever moving towards you. And if you're honest, you felt it long before it ended. Yeah. You felt it in the delays. You felt it in the half answers. You felt it in the jumping around and changing the subject answers. In the way conversations circled but never landed. In how your clarity was met with deflection and oblivion. In how your vulnerability didn't invite reciprocity, it invited distance. You felt it, but you explained it away. You told yourself timing was off. You told yourself they were overwhelmed. You told yourself patience was love. But patience without direction isn't love. It's suspension. And suspension is exhausting. Here's the hardest part to swallow, really. Nobody tricked you. Nobody tricked you. They showed up exactly in a way that would show you what they were offering. You just kept upgrading it in your head. You added meaning where there wasn't any. You extended benefits where there was no investment. You gave depth to something that was shallow by design. And that's not because you're foolish. It's because you're generous. It's because you're nice. It's because you're hopeful. It's because you're trusting. It's because you want what you want, what you wanted. But generosity without boundaries doesn't make you noble, it makes you invisible. That's the pivot point. The moment you stop asking why they didn't hold on and start asking, why did you? Not with cruelty or with clarity, man. Because when you look closely, you'll see the pattern. You stayed because leaving meant accepting the truth you weren't ready to carry, that you wanted something they didn't have to give to you. And maybe you knew that they had it to give to other, even specific people. They might even have talked about them. The times when they talked about not being chosen or not choosing someone that they really were into at some point in their life. Just to realize that they were just bouncing that off you, acting as though things didn't work out with somebody else. And now you have decided that they're not the one when really the reason why they're presenting it is like in some hopes of a maniacal way of bringing themselves to the belief that the person actually does want them and they were dumping them when they know they are being dumped unless they give whatever it is the other wants because they care about that situation more than the other person, just like you care more than they do. Hopefully that didn't twist you around. The potential is a dangerous thing to fall in love with, I guess. Potential is a dangerous thing to fall in love with. It keeps you future focused and it keeps you blind to what's happening right in front of you. So here you are now. You're not angry. You're not devastated. You got some bumps and bruises, and maybe a lot of bumps and bruises. A phenomenal amount, maybe. But you are awake. And awakening doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like a loss layered with self awareness, like you were on a treadmill. You expelled a lot of energy. You spent a lot of time, but you went nowhere. You mourn the connection, then you mourn the time. Then you mourn the version of yourself that believed patience would be actually rewarded. And maybe you still believe that patience should be and will be rewarded. And then, well, and then slowly something turns over. You stop needing them to understand. You stop needing them to validate the ending. You stop waiting for a message that would make it make sense. Because sense was never the problem, attachment was. And the moment you see that clearly, you don't need closure for them or from them anymore. You already gave it to yourself. That isn't the part where I tell you everything happens for a reason. That's lazy comfort. This is the part where I tell you the reason is revealed after you stop chasing explanation and start reclaiming yourself. Not loudly, not performatively, just quietly. You pull your energy back. You stop narrating your feelings to people who never asked how you were doing in the first place. You stop auditioning for understanding and auditioning for love and auditioning for reciprocity and auditioning for whatever it is that floats your boat, turns your crank, you know? Not healed, not perfect, but at least you're not reaching anymore. Had your hand slapped too many times. So now what? Now you sit with this discomfort without rushing to replace it. Now you let the silence teach you what the noise couldn't. Now you rebuild discernment instead of hope. Because hope kept you there. Discernment will move you forward. And in the next part of this episode, I want to ask you some questions. Not the kind meant to impress, the kind meant to reveal everything that you need to know about something that you're going to do about something. Questions that don't make you feel better immediately, but make you more honest with yourself over time. Stay with me, y'all. Let's move this thing. All right, cool. Here's where it usually gets uncomfortable. Not because of them, because of you. And you know it's real. Because once the silence settles, once the storyline collapses, once there's no message to react to, you're left alone with the part of you that you tried not to examine while everything was still kind of moving and trickling along. The part where you ask yourself a question you avoided out loud, the kind of question that you would ask anybody who you saw doing the same things that you were doing. Not, why didn't they choose me? That question keeps you stuck. The real question is, why did I keep choosing this version almost? Almost. Because if you're honest, there were exits, quiet ones, early ones, moments where your body knew before your mouth did. You ignored the tightening in your chest. You ignored the irritation you brushed off as overthinking. You ignored how often you were explaining instead of being met. You ignored those few times of wonderfulness that were followed by total emptiness. Yeah, that feeling that you felt there. And you decided, maybe not. And then you carried on over and over and over and over. And let's call it what it is. That wasn't loyalty, that was self-abandonment, dressed up as patience. You were misunderstood. Meanwhile, you were overfunctioning. You were doing emotional labor for two people and calling it partnership. You were holding space for someone who never asked you to hold it in the first place and never cared about what it cost you. You were offering clarity to someone who survived by staying very, very vague and cloudy. And here's the brutal truth. Some people don't pull away because they're cruel, although some people are cruel. Let's try this cookie again. They pull away because your depth exposes their limits and makes them look bad. They don't leave loudly, though, right? Damn you! No. They let you do the work of leaving slowly, ripping the band-aid off your own skin. Very, very slow, hair after hair after hair. They stay just present enough to keep that door cracked. Who knows? You might need a backup plan for a day. But just for a moment. They respond just enough to keep hope alive, like Jesse Jackson. every time something bad happens. Oh, that's a good one. I don't know if you get it, but anyway. The black community. All right, anyway. They accept support without stepping into responsibility. Not because they planned it, though, but because it works. And as long as it works, it continues. And they receive, and you give, and you give, and you give, and you give it all away. Think about it. Yeah, you might want to go back and listen to that song again. This is where you have to stop pretending. It was all confusion. There was information all along, and I got you. You better not disconnect from this episode because I got you. There was information all along, and you know it. You just didn't like what it implied. You just didn't want to let go. You just were too invested. You just had too many experiences with that individual to say that you're moving on. You knew who initiated. You knew who would follow up. You knew who would always come through. You knew who adjusted and who stayed exactly the same. You were there waiting for them to grow or waiting for you to grow on them. But they had Kevlar on and you were wearing Velcro. You knew who felt relief when there was distance, and you know who felt anxiety. That imbalance wasn't an accident, it was the actual dynamic. And here's where I don't soften it really. If you keep calling it emotional breadcrumbs, mixed signals, you never have to admit you are accepting less than you want. And a lot of times when you do that, you end up being bitter and angry at them if things don't work out in the distance, because you both keep that dynamic alive. Mixed signals are not confusing. They're just inconsistent effort with plausible deniability. And you stayed because inconsistency keeps hope alive. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, but you know you're going to go up again. It lets you believe that the best version is still coming somehow. It's just around it. She'll be coming around the corner when she comes. Dude, she ain't coming, man. But eventually, you have to admit something that hurts more than actual rejection. They weren't undecided. They were undecided about you. And when something better came along, they bounced. They probably didn't tell you about it, though. They're just hoping that you would just slowly disappear. And that realization bruises the ego in so many ways. And the funny thing is, most people don't talk about it because it forces you to confront a deeper question. Why was I willing to negotiate for interest? Why are you trying to get the interest? Why aren't you trying to get the capital? Yeah, it works that way too. Why did I lower the bar quietly instead of raising the questions clearly? Why did I accept ambiguity instead of demanding alignment? Or at least leave? Why did I mistake access for attention? That's not a character flaw, though, yo. That's a pattern. And patterns don't dissolve with insight alone. They dissolve with better questions like, what do I confuse with chemistry? What do I call potential when I should call it incompatibility? What kind of silence do I tolerate because confrontation feels risky? What part of me believes living means failure instead of self respect? Because you're still single. Or maybe not. These aren't questions you answer once. These are questions you revisit every time you feel yourself reaching, but not grasping anything. It's like trying to hold the wind, try to inherit the wind. Well, Biff, or Biffette, because the quiet shift happens when you stop chasing resolution. You just see it for what it is, a ricey television. You stop replaying conversations. You stop wondering what that meant or what they meant. You might even have deleted all of their messages. You stop hoping for a message that would change the ending. And you start noticing your own behavior with precision. You notice how quickly you offer reassurance, how easily you minimize your needs. How often you say, it's fine, when it isn't. But that's where the work is, y'all. Not in getting over them, but in getting back yourself. And in the next section, I want you to slow down and think about this. I want you to think about this even further. I want to ask the kind of questions that don't expose anyone else. They just expose you, if you're willing. The ones you can't answer on autopilot. The ones that tell you who you are when nobody's actually watching. Stay with me, man. This is where the so-called clarity, I hate that word. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I've heard it too many times and I've said it too many times. Begins anyway. The mirror you avoid. This is the part most people skip. Not because it's confusing, but because it's clarifying. Once the other person fades out of focus, once the silence stretches long enough that you can no longer blame timing or circumstance, something uncomfortable happens. The mirror shows up. And it's not the one that's flattering. It might be one of those ones you get at the amusement park. But you distorted yourself. Not the one where you explain yourself well and come out looking reasonable. The honest one. The one that asks, why did you stay when the evidence kept piling up on the other side? Why did you wait for consistency instead of responding to inconsistency the same? Why you treated hope like it was a strategy? Here's the part that stings. You were not holding on to them. You were holding on to a version of yourself that felt purposeful while trying. Trying gave you your day's structure because you knew what you're going to be doing. Trying gave your emotions direction. Trying made the waiting feel meaningful, right? You had a purpose. Letting go did not just mean losing them. It meant losing the role you had been playing. The fixer, the steady one, the emotional, fluently capable adult in the room. The role feels good until it costs too much. More than you wanted to spend of whatever it is you spent. Because eventually you realize something hard to admit. You were showing up at a full volume for someone who kept the relationship at half. And instead of turning your volume down or walking away, you leaned in harder. You were more intentional with it. You called it effort. You called it patience. You called it maturity. But let's be honest, some of that was just straight up fair. Fair that if you stopped caring, the connection would collapse. Fair that if you asked for clarity, you would get an answer you didn't want to hear. Fair that walking away would confirm a belief you didn't want to face, like maybe this was the last time you were going to have a viable option at someone in this certain whatever it is that makes you feel a certain way that most people don't. That you are easier to lean on than to actually choose. You're comfortable. You're like an old shoe. You like that teddy bear with the one eye pop hanging out, dangling, or not even there at all. Or maybe you're the stuffed animal that's lost most of its stuffing through a hole in you. That belief does not come from nowhere. It comes from repetition, from being the dependable one, from being the listener, from being the person who people open up to barely, rarely pursue with urgency. You become emotionally familiar before you become emotionally prioritized, and familiarity without intention turns into entitlement. People start assuming you will stay available. They assume you will understand. They assume you will adapt, not because they are villains, because you taught them you would. That is the part nobody wants to hear. But it is the part that gives you your power back. You train people how to treat you, they say, by how you tolerate and what you don't tolerate, without naming at least. Every time you ignore the lack of follow through, every time you accept proximity without any commitment, and what kind of proximity did you offer? Every time you softened your needs to keep the peace instead of tearing them a new one, you enforce the pattern. This is not self blame, this is self ownership. Because ownership is the moment the story stops repeating, obviously. Here is a hard truth that might sting for a second and then it might set you free at the same time, this whole thing. People who want you do not leave you guessing for weeks and months. They do not oscillate between closeness and distance. They do not accept your care while avoiding any accountability or reciprocity. They don't throw peanuts and breadcrumbs and cracker jacks. Interest looks like movement, and where is that movement? Towards you. Care looks like consistency with you, doing for you, being with you, talking to you, hanging out, caring for you, following through for you. Respect looks like clarity, what you do together, what anybody could actually see that aren't you two, with something that doesn't need to be looked at like, oh, that was a code for something else. No, it looks like what it is because that's what you see. If somebody has to define it for you, then it ain't what you think it is. Everything else is noise. And if you're honest, there were moments when the noise got loud enough that you almost walked away. But you stayed because you believed your patience would eventually be rewarded, because you believed being understanding would change the dynamic. You believed because explaining yourself over and over and over, and they would finally see you, but nah, that's not intimacy. You're auditioning still. And nobody should have to audition for someone who claims to value them, but you're on a couch. nonetheless. So the real question is not why is it ending or why did it end or why did it end that way? The real question is what part of you needed this to last longer than it should have? Was it the part that hates unfinished stories? Was it the part that equates endurance with worth? Is it the part that feels validated by being needed more than being chosen? Because they needed you. Still didn't choose you, though. The answers are always, in these situations, uncomfortable at best. But they're also pretty precise. Because once you see that, you stop confusing attachment with connection. You stop romanticizing your struggle. You stop mistaking emotional availability for emotional safety. You begin to understand something quieter and more grounded. Letting go of an act of loss. It is an act of correction. You are not erasing what happened. You are, for lack of a better word, realigning with what you deserve. And in the next section, I want you to slow down even further. I want you to ask questions that do not point outward at anyone else, questions that reveal how you move, how you attach, how you choose. Not to judge yourself, really, but to understand yourself clearly enough that this pattern doesn't have to happen again. This is where things start to shift from insight to change. This is where the work actually starts, not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that nobody applauds. Because once the emotions actually settle, once the storyline loses its grip, you are left with yourself and see things for what they are. And the only way to forward really from here is through better questions. Not questions about them, not questions about timing or mixed signals or what they really meant. Questions about you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most definitely avoid. You do not repeat patterns because you're unlucky. You repeat them because something familiar inside of you feels safer than something unknown. So let's ask this question about, to expose familiarity. When someone pulls away, right? Do you lean in or do you pause? When someone feels unclear, do you seek clarity or do you fill in the gaps yourself? When something feels unclear, I mean, do you seek clarity? Do you fill in the gaps? When you sense imbalance, do you address it or do you adjust yourself to keep things smooth and balanced as best you can? None of these are actual character flaws, though, y'all. They're strategies. Strategies you learn somewhere along the line. At some point in your life, being adaptable kept you connected, being understanding kept you included, being low maintenance kept you from being left behind and kept around. No big deal. It's just over there in the corner. Those strategies worked, though, back then. They just don't work now. And here's the part that matters. If you keep using old strategies in new seasons of your life, you will keep attracting situations that feel oddly familiar and deeply disappointing. So ask yourself this. Do you feel most alive when someone chooses you freely or when someone needs you urgently? Because those are not the same thing. Need can feel intoxicating. It gives you a role, it gives you relevance, it gives you your purpose. But need without choice eventually turns into obligation, and obligation kills all desire. Another question: do you mistake emotional closeness for emotional investment? Just because someone tells you their story doesn't mean they are building a future with you. Just because someone leans on you does not mean they are leaning towards you. Listening is not commitment. Vulnerability is not direction. If you are honest, you have probably felt this before. That strange disconnect where you know everything about someone, yet you still do not know where you stand with them. And maybe something really close happened. And you're like sitting there, like I said before, and you're like, what is this? All of a sudden, you get this moment of clarity, and you're like, I can't believe it. I have to end this. And then for some reason, that feeling fades for whatever reason. That is not depth, that's imbalance. And sometimes you get amazing, or you used to get amazing moments of clarity and imbalance, just seeing it. Here's another one. When someone gives you less, do you give more to compensate? More understanding, more patience, more grace, more money, more things. It feels noble until it becomes a pattern where you're always doing emotional heavy lifting or otherwise. Relationships are not built by the person who carries the most weight. They're built by two people moving in the same direction at the same pace, carrying a proportionate amount of the same weight. What would happen if you stopped explaining yourself? Not in anger, not in tactic, but just with boundary. If someone misunderstood you and you did not rush to correct it, what are you afraid what would happen? If someone pulls back and you don't chase, what story does your mind tell you? Often the fear is not abandonment, it's invisibility. The fear that if you are not actively proving your value, you will not, or you will be, I should say, be forgotten. But the truth is, people who value you do not need convincing. They notice your absence, they feel the shift, they respond. And people who do not respond were never confused, they were comfortable. And this section is not about, becoming colder. It's about becoming clearer. Clear about what you want, clear about what you offer, clear about what will no longer overextend, or what you will no longer overextend to keep anything alive. Clear about what you will not accept. Because clarity changes everything. It changes who feels entitled to your time, it changes who gets access to your energy and your time. And it shows you where you're going. And there's actually a geological almost change. It changes who stays when effort is no longer guaranteed. And here's the final question for this section, really. If nothing changed, if you kept showing up the same way, Would this situation have turned into what you hoped it would be? Or will you just end up tapped out at some point? Not in theory, but actually in practice. Are you going for the Romeo and Juliet, even though you're more like, I don't know, Bugs Bunny and I don't even know what to say. Elmer Fudd. If the answer is no, then letting go is not a failure. It's alignment. In the next section, I want to talk about what happens after alignment. The question or the quiet recalibration, the unfamiliar calm, the part where things feel empty, right? At first, not because you lost something, but because you stopped feeding something that was never feeding you back anyway. The part, that part scares people most of the time, but it also where pace starts to show up. Peace starts to show up. You start to have peace. Peace. Listen, there is a moment that nobody warns you about and probably never really saw in other people's marriages or relationships or whatever. It comes after you stop explaining. Nobody does that because it's always done in quiet anyway and in private usually. After you stop checking your phone, after you stop filling the silence, it's not relief right away, it's quiet and allowing you to focus on other things. And at first, the quiet feels wrong because for a long time, noise felt like connection, messages, tension, hope, replaying conversations, wondering if today would be different. When all that stops, your nervous system does not immediately relax. It looks around and asks, what now? This is the recalibration phase, and most people never ask long enough to experience it. They mistake calm for emptiness. They mistake peace for boredom. They mistake stability for lack of chemistry. So they reach back for what feels familiar, even if it hurts. Yeah, they do. You might have seen it right in front of your eyes as they're reaching to somebody else, maybe. But here's the truth: the discomfort you feel after letting go is not loneliness, it's withdrawal. You're not missing the person, you're missing the role that you were playing, the job you had, the fixer, the supporter, the emotional first responder. When you stop being needed in that way, there is a strange, empty identity gap, I guess. You are no longer reacting, you're no longer waiting, you are no longer hoping something changes. You are just there. And that is where, you know, a lot of people just panic because being there forces you to ask questions you've been avoiding. This Kirkland water is good, man. Strange, huh? Ionized, not alkaline, whatever. Because, being there forces you to, just answer those questions and look at yourself in the mirror and think about what's real. What do I do with my time when I'm not managing someone else's emotions? Who am I when I'm not trying to earn closeness? What do I actually enjoy when I'm not emotionally on call? This is where growth either happens or gets interrupted. If you sit with it long enough, something changes. Your breath slows, your thoughts become clearer, your body stops bracing for impact, change and flip flopping and push and pull. You start noticing things you ignored before, right? How tired you actually were, how often minimized your needs were, how much effort you were putting into something that wasn't meeting you even close to halfway. You also start noticing something else. You're not anxious all the time anymore. You're not wondering where you stand. You're not decoding anything. No more hoping today is finally the day that they're going to actually show up. Nah. And that's when the grief comes. Not grief for the person, just grief for who you were and who you kept believing you were going to be with them. Grief, for the time you spent explaining yourself to someone who wasn't even listening in the first place. Grief for the energy you invested hoping inconsistency would magically appear. That grief is healthy. It means you are telling yourself the truth. And here's the important point: closure doesn't come from the conversation, it comes from you having comprehension of what has actually been going on. From finally understanding what was happening without needing the other person to admit it. Not to need an apology to move on, not to need validation to let go. You don't need them to agree with you right now or what's happening, but you need acceptance. Acceptance that effort was uneven, acceptance that timing was not the issue, acceptance that you were available in ways that they were not and you probably shouldn't have been either. That acceptance brings dignity back. Yeah. You stop feeling rejected. You start feeling right. And that changes how you carry it. You know, you look good, you feel good. You feel good, you do good. You do good, you get paid good. Now something subtle begins to flip and switch and happen. Your standards sharpen, your tolerance for ambiguity drops. Nah. Your attraction shifts. Yeah, you got more attraction now. You stop being drawn to intensity without stability. You stop confusing emotional depths with emotional chaos. You begin to want ease, not excitement, not a lustful charge, a best friend that you love, not connection that comes with anxiety, ease, consistency, normalcy, clarity, someone who doesn't make you guess what's behind my back. This is where people often say, I feel different now. Yes, you are different. You're not colder, you're not closed, you're just clearer. You know what's going on. Next section, I want you to think about, I want you to, I want to talk about something that scares people even more than letting go. What happens when someone comes back? Not to stay, but to see if they still can. That moment reveals everything. Check it out. After silence, after distance, after you finally stop reaching, that is when they resurface. Hey, not loudly. And hopefully, you didn't do this in some sort of a sadomasochistic way and actually wait for this, torturing yourself for this really small window of a time that they're going to reach back out. Not directly, not with accountability, but subtly. A message that feels casual, a check in that pretends nothing happened. You just lost touch. A soft reach that tests temperature. And this moment matters more than anything that came before it because this is not about connection, it's about access. When someone circles back after letting go, they are not responding to your words. They are responding to your absence and things that you used to do and the way you make me feel. You really turn me on, right? Your silence disrupted the balance. You are no longer supplying reassurance. You are no longer emotionally available on demand. You are no longer predictable. If they wanted to be consistent before, they would have been. It's that simple. There was no, I didn't have time, I was doing this. They would have made time. You understand? That's how it works in general, consistently. Maybe there's a couple of times when it's just unable to happen, but yes, their friend is going to have to wait till they can get in contact with you. Sorry, we can't do wine tonight because I got to do this over here with this one over here because that's the person I'm with. That's the person I choose because that's what I want. So obviously, I'm going to move towards what I want. And the other thing can dangle along if it wants to. If they wanted clarity, they would have offered it in the to the best of their ability. If they wanted depth, they would have showed up when you asked for it, and you did ask. So when they come back without addressing anything that matters, that's not it. That's your answer. They're not returning to build, they are returning to check if they still have access and if the door is still unlocked for them. If you left the key under the mat. This is where people lose their progress because the reach back feels validating. It feels like, oh, finally, this is what I thought. It feels like proof that you actually mattered. It feels like maybe you were wrong. It feels like maybe they finally realized something. But listen to me carefully. Attention is not intention. Someone can miss your presence without being willing to change their behavior, without missing actually you, the person you are, not the person in action, the person doing for them. Someone can want access to you without even wanting any type of responsibility with you. Someone can crave the comfort, the joy, the whatever that you provide, but still avoiding any kind of commitment to you, any decision really on you. And if you engage the same way you did before, the cycle, the cycle resets. Same confusion, same imbalance, same emotional labor. Nothing changes unless the structure changes. So here's the question you need to ask yourself in that moment. Are they showing up differently or are they just showing up again, the same way? Because those are not the same thing. Different looks like accountability. Different looks like clarity. Different looks like effort without prompting. Same looks like nostalgia. Same looks like vague affection. Same looks like flirting without direction. If nothing is named, nothing is resolved. And here is the most important thing. You do not owe them a response just because they're reaching out. You do not owe them politeness at the expense of your peace. You do not owe them access just because you have a shared history and you went down that road. Growth means you respond based on what is aligning and with what and who you are. Sometimes the strongest response is calm distance. Sometimes it's no response at all. Sometimes it's short, neutral, that gives nothing extra, nor asks for anything. And that moment is a test, not of your worth, but of your boundaries. Just that simple. And passing this test does feel strange because for the first time you choose yourself without explaining why. Because it's obvious. When the noise finally stops, something uncomfortable happens. Obviously it gets quiet. Not peaceful at first, though, just quiet. Not waiting for messages, not reading tone in silence, not wondering where you stand. And for a lot of people, that quiet feels like a loss because chaos, as exhausting as it is, gives structure, exhilarating at times, obviously. It gives rhythm, it gives something to react to. When that disappears, you're left with yourself, you know? Nothing pushing or tugging or pushing or pulling at you. And this is where most people panic and they can't handle it. They say they miss the person, but what they really miss is the distraction that you were. They miss having something outside of themselves to focus on. They miss the emotional stimulation. They miss the sense of purpose that came from trying to be close. So let's call it what it is. The relationship did not end and leave a hole. It tended to reveal one. And that hole was not created by them. It exists before them. They just happened to occupy it for whatever reason for however long. What replaces the chaos is not commitment or excitement, it's clarity. And clarity feels boring at first. There was no adrenaline, no spikes, no emotional roller coaster. Just pattern, just habit, just another sad love song rocking my brain. Whatever that was. Just the reality of your days. And here is the hard part. You have to sit in that long enough to learn who you are without being needed, without being relied on, without being emotionally anchoring anybody, without being the one who always understands. This is where self trust is built. Not in a moment of confidence, but in a moment of restraint. Self trust is not loud. It does not annoy itself or announce itself. Sorry, annoy itself. It grows quietly every time you do not chase for clarity from someone else. Every time you do not explain yourself again, every time you let silence just sit there, eventually something shifts when you let those things happen. You stop scanning the room for them. You stop replaying conversations. You stop wondering what you should do, what should you have done differently, and because finally acceptance is truth. You were not unclear. They were just unwilling. And that realization changes how you move. Society's getting more unpredictable every day. Gee, how'd that happen? You start asking different questions. You start asking different questions about all kinds of stuff. Not like, do you like me? Do they like me? But do I like how I feel around them? About myself, how do I feel about myself with them? Not can I help them, but do they add anything to my life beyond tension, beyond need, beyond work? Is there something always going on, or are you able to rest with each other? Not can I help them, but do they add anything to me at all? Not will they choose me, but would choosing them require me to abandon myself again? Hope is passive. Standards are active. Hope waits. Standards decide. And once you have standards, chaos has nowhere to land because chaos requires access, and access now has conditions. It's not about being closed off, it's about becoming selective to whom or for very few. Well, being selective really to who you open yourself to. Yeah, literally. You still care, you still feel, you're still open, but you are no longer available to dynamics that drain you. And that is the difference between being alone and being free. Being alone is absence, being free is alignment. You did not lose someone, you lost a version of yourself that was willing to overextend just to feel connected. And that is not loss, that is growth. That is where the end of this really is, guys. I don't have the answers at the end of the day. And that's, I guess, maybe the sad part of this. But at least it gets you looking at things the way they are, hopefully. And hopefully something better will happen. And hopefully it'll happen soon once you're looking in the right direction, once you're focusing on yourself, the things you need to accomplish. And if you're a Christian, you're God. You're focusing on the Lord. You're not focusing on a person and turning them into some sort of a demigod. And you realize that you do have boundaries and you're not going to cross that one again where you just build somebody up. You lift me up. No, just joking. And the quiet confidence that comes from finally knowing that if someone is meant to stay, then guess what? They will. And it won't require distance to keep them. You know? Anyways, if any of this made sense, then maybe you're closer to getting to where you need to get in the first place and stepping out of where you've been. And that's where everything actually starts. Anyhow, guys, this has been a long talk. If anything, maybe it's just a pep talk. But as I said, don't feel no way. If you're here now and you should have been here a long time ago, I'm just happy that you're here now. You've seen everything for what it is. It's time to make better choices, but starting with choosing yourself, not to be run down by anybody else. And I would say ultimately choosing the Lord and following the instructions of the Bible, the actual instructions, not people's interpretations, but in an expository way. Anyhow, y'all, I'll see you again. Hopefully you'll come back through and pass this on to someone you think might need to hear it. And if this episode and all the other ones or any of the other ones tickled your fancy, well, chances are something else will again. So please follow. Okay. All right. Take care of yourself. MC, I'm out. Hey, come check out You Probably Right podcast. Society is getting more unpredictable every day, but at the same time, predictable in its unpredictability. Say that 4 times real fast. Come with me as I attempt to find clarity in all the fog while staying way outside the box and kicking the box way down the road with my size 12 ducks. I use the Bible, experience, education, fortune, misfortune, life's lessons, life's mistakes to sort through all the mess. I talk about news, God, God, self-help, sports, sickness, health, music, parenting, love, humbleness, hurt, pain, joy, and all the things that might make you say, I never thought of it that way. Hopefully, anyway. Also, I take a stab at answering tough and not so tough questions, and all the while understand that, listen, Sometimes you end up in the hot seat and there's no thermostat. Well, that's how it is here. And because there's no topic, well, very few topics off the table, Torontonians will understand that Doug Ford reference there. Hopefully the podcast will be helpful and uplifting. And hey, maybe you'll find your own private Idaho here somewhere. Hope to see you soon.
Ooh, yeah. Listen. It's getting late and I'm still wide awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the space you take. One day you're here, next day you're gone, and I'm just trying to understand where we went wrong. You only love me in the middle of the night, then you fade away with the morning light. I need to know, is this for real? Tell me how you truly feel. Oh, yeah. I give my all, you give me half your heart. You say the words, but we just stay so far apart. These mixed signals are tearing me down, lost in the silence when you're not around. Tell me how you feel. How you really feel. Is any of this real? Just tell me, yeah. Tell me, baby. Oh. You only love me in the middle of the night. Then you fade away with the morning light. I need to know, is this for real? Tell me how you truly feel.